When it was the sixth night, her sister Dunyazad said to her, "Pray finish for us thy story." And she answered, "I will, if the King give me leave." "Say on," quoth the King, and she continued, "It hath reached me, O auspicious King, that when the Fisherman said to the Ifrit, 'If thou hadst spared me, I would have spared thee, but nothing would satisfy thee save my death. So now I will do thee die by jailing thee in this jar, and I will hurl thee into this sea.' Then the Marid roared aloud and cried, 'Allah upon thee, O Fisherman, don't! Spare me and pardon my past doings, and, as I have been tyrannous, so be thou generous. For it is said among sayings that go current, 'O thou who dost good to him who hath done thee evil, suffice for the ill doer his ill deeds, and do not deal with me as did Umamah to Atikah.'" Asked the Fisherman, "And what was their case?" And the Ifrit answered, "This is not the time for story telling and I in this prison; but set me free and I will tell thee the tale." Quoth the Fisherman, "Leave this language. There is no help but that thou be thrown back into the sea, nor is there any way for thy getting out of it for ever and ever. Vainly I placed myself under thy protection, and I humbled myself to thee with weeping, while thou soughtest only to slay me, who hath done thee no injury deserving this at thy hands. Nay, so far from injuring thee by any evil act, I worked thee naught but weal in releasing thee from that jail of thine. Now I knew thee to be an evil doer when thou diddest to me what thou didst, and know that when I have cast thee back into the sea, I will warn whomsoever may fish thee up of what hath befallen me with thee, and I will advise him to toss thee back again. So shalt thou abide here under these waters till the end of time shall make an end of thee." But the Ifrit cried aloud, "Set me free! This is a noble occasion for generosity, and I make covenant with thee and vow never to do thee hurt and harm. Nay, I will help thee to what shall put thee out of want." The Fisherman accepted his promises on both conditions, not to trouble him as before, but on the contrary to do him service; and, after making firm the plight and swearing him a solemn oath by Allah Most Highest, he opened the cucurbit. Thereupon the pillar of smoke rose up till all of it was fully out; then it thickened and once more became an Ifrit of hideous presence, who forthright administered a kick to the bottle and sent it flying into the sea. The Fisherman, seeing how the cucurbit was treated, and making sure of his own death, piddled in his clothes, and said to himself, "This promiseth badly." But he fortified his heart and cried, "O Ifrit, Allah hath said, 'Perform your covenant, for the performance of your covenant shall be inquired into hereafter.' Thou hast made a vow to me and hast sworn an oath not to play me false, lest Allah play thee false; for verily He is a jealous God who respiteth the sinner, but letteth him not escape. I say to thee, as said the sage Duban to King Yunan, 'Spare me so Allah may spare thee.'" The Ifrit burst into laughter and stalked away, saying to the Fisherman, "Follow me," and the man paced after him at a safe distance, for he was not assured of escape, till they had passed round the suburbs of the city. Thence they struck into the uncultivated grounds and, crossing them, descended into a broad wilderness, and lo! in the midst of it stood a mountain tarn. The Ifrit waded into the middle and again cried, "Follow me," and when this was done he took his stand in the centre and bade the man cast his net and catch his fish. The Fisherman looked into the water and was much astonished to see therein vari-coloured fishes, white and red, blue and yellow. However he cast his net and, hauling it in, saw that he had netted 4 fishes, one of each colour. Thereat he rejoiced greatly, and more when the Ifrit said to him, "Carry these to the Sultan and set them in his presence; then he will give thee what shall make thee a wealthy man. And now accept my excuse, for by Allah at this time I wot none other way of benefiting thee. inasmuch as I have lain in this sea 1800 years, and have not seen the face of the world save within this hour. But I would not have thee fish here save once a day." The Ifrit then gave him Godspeed, saying, "Allah grant we meet again," and struck the earth with one foot, whereupon the ground clove asunder and swallowed him up. The Fisherman, much marvelling at what had happened to him with the Ifrit, took the fish and made for the city, and as soon as he reached home he filled an earthen bowl with water, and therein threw the fish, which began to struggle and wriggle about. Then he bore off the bowl upon his head, and repairing to the King's palace, even as the Ifrit had bidden him, laid the fish before the presence. And the King wondered with exceeding wonder at the sight, for never in his lifetime had he seen fishes like these in quality or in conformation. So he said, "Give those fish to the stranger slave girl who now cooketh for us," meaning the bond maiden whom the King of Roum had sent to him only 3 days before, so that he had not yet made trial of her talents in the dressing of meat. Thereupon the Wazir carried the fish to the cook and bade her fry them, saying, "O damsel, the King sendeth this say to thee, I have not treasured thee, O tear of me, save for stress time of me. Approve then to us this day thy delicate handiwork and thy savoury cooking, for this dish of fish is a present sent to the Sultan, and evidently a rarity." The Wazir, after he had carefully charged her, returned to the King, who commanded him to give the Fisherman 400 dinars. He gave them accordingly, and the man took them to his bosom and ran off home, stumbling and falling and rising again, and deeming the whole thing to be a dream. However, he bought for his family all they wanted, and lastly he went to his wife in huge joy and gladness. So far concerning him. But as regards the cookmaid, she took the fish and cleansed them, and set them in the frying pan, basting them with oil till one side was dressed. Then she turned them over, and behold, the kitchen wall clave asunder, and therefrom came a young lady, fair of form, oval of face, perfect in grace, with eyelids which kohl lines in chase. Her dress was a silken head kerchief, fringed and tasselled with blue. A large ring hung from either ear, a pair of bracelets adorned her wrists, rings with bezels of priceless gems were on her fingers, and she hent in hand a long rod of rattan cane, which she thrust into the frying pan, saying, O fish, be ye constant to your covenant." When the cook maiden saw this apparition she swooned away. The young lady repeated her words a second time and a third time, and at last the fishes raised their heads from the pan, and saying in articulate speech, "Yes, yes," began with one voice to recite, "Come back, and so will I; keep faith, and so will I; and if ye fain forsake, I'll requite till quits we cry." After this the young lady upset the frying pan, and went forth by the way she came in, and the kitchen wall closed upon her. When the cook maiden recovered from her fainting fit, she saw the 4 fishes charred black as charcoal, and crying out, "His staff brake in his first bout," she again fell swooning to the ground. Whilst she was in this case the Wazir came for the fish, and looking upon her as insensible she lay, not knowing Sunday from Thursday, shoved her with his foot and said, "Bring the fish for the Sultan." Thereupon, recovering from her fainting fit, she wept and informed him of her case and all that had befallen her. The Wazir marvelled greatly and exclaiming, "This is none other than a right strange matter," he sent after the Fisherman and said to him, "Thou, O Fisherman, must needs fetch us 4 fishes like those thou broughtest before." Thereupon the man repaired to the tarn and cast his net, and when he landed it, lo! 4 fishes were therein exactly like the first. These he at once carried to the Wazir, who went in with them to the cook maiden and said, "Up with thee and fry these in my presence, that I may see this business." The damsel arose and cleansed the fish and set them in the frying pan over the fire. However, they remained there but a little while, ere the wall clave asunder, and the young lady appeared, clad as before, and holding in hand the wand which she again thrust into the frying pan, saying, O fish, be ye constant to your olden covenant. And behold, the fish lifted their heads and repeated, Yes, yes, and recited this couplet: Come back, and so will I. Keep faith, and so will I. But if ye fain forsake, I'll requite till quits we cry. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day and ceased saying her permitted say. When it was the Seventh Night, she continued, It hath reached me, O auspicious King, that when the fishes spoke, and the young lady upset the frying pan with her rod, and went forth by the way she came, and the wall closed up, the Wazir cried out, This is a thing not to be hidden from the King. So he went and told him what had happened, whereupon quoth the King, There is no help for it but that I see this with mine own eyes. Then he sent for the fisherman and commanded him to bring 4 other fish like the first, and to take with him 3 men as witnesses. The fisherman at once brought the fish, and the King, after ordering them to give him 400 gold pieces, turned to the Wazir and said, Up and fry me the fishes here before me. The Minister, replying, To hear is to obey, bade bring the frying pan, threw therein the cleansed fish, and set it over the fire, when lo! the wall clave asunder, and out burst a black slave like a huge rock or a remnant of the tribe Ad, bearing in hand a branch of a green tree, and he cried in loud and terrible tones, O fish! O fish! Be ye all constant to your antique covenant? Whereupon the fishes lifted their heads from the frying pan and said, Yes, yes, we be true to our vow. And they again recited the couplet, Come back, and so will I. Keep faith, and so will I. But if ye fain forsake, I'll requite till quits we cry. Then the huge blackamoor approached the frying pan and upset it with the branch, and went forth by the way he came in. When he vanished from their sight, the King inspected the fish, and finding them all charred black as charcoal, was utterly bewildered, and said to the Wazir, Verily this is a matter whereanent silence cannot be kept, and as for the fishes, assuredly some marvellous adventure connects with them. So he bade bring the fisherman and asked him, saying, Fie on thee, fellow, whence came these fishes? And he answered, From a tarn between 4 heights, lying behind this mountain which is in sight of thy city. Quoth the King, How many days' march? Quoth he, O our lord the Sultan, a walk of half hour. The King wondered, and straightway ordering his men to march and horsemen to mount, led off the fisherman, who went before as guide, privily damning the Ifrit. They fared on till they had climbed the mountain and descended unto a great desert, which they had never seen during all their lives. And the Sultan and his merry men marvelled much at the wold set in the midst of 4 mountains, and the tarn and its fishes of 4 colours, red and white, yellow and blue. The King stood fixed to the spot in wonderment, and asked his troops and all present, Hath any one among you ever seen this piece of water before now? And all made answer, O King of the age, never did we set eyes upon it during all our days. They also questioned the oldest inhabitants they met, men well stricken in years, but they replied each and every, A lakelet this we never saw in this place. Thereupon quoth the King, By Allah, I will neither return to my capital nor sit upon the throne of my forebears till I learn the truth about this tarn and the fish therein. He then ordered his men to dismount and bivouac all around the mountain, which they did, and summoning his Wazir, a minister of much experience, sagacious, of penetrating wit and well versed in affairs, said to him, "'Tis in my mind to do a certain thing, whereof I will inform thee. My heart telleth me to fare forth alone this night and root out the mystery of this tarn and its fishes." Do thou take thy seat at my tent door, and say to the Emirs and Wazirs, the Nabobs and the Chamberlains, in fine, to all who ask thee, the Sultan is ill at ease, and he hath ordered me to refuse all admittance, and be careful thou let none know my design." And the Wazir could not oppose him. Then the King changed his dress and ornaments, and slinging his sword over his shoulder, took a path which led up one of the mountains, and marched for the rest of the night till morning dawned. Nor did he cease wayfaring till the heat was too much for him. After his long walk he rested awhile, and then resumed his march and fared on through the second night till dawn, when suddenly there appeared a black point in the far distance. Hereat he rejoiced and said to himself, "Haply some one here shall acquaint me with the mystery of the tarn and its fishes." Presently drawing near the dark object, he found it a palace built of swart stone plated with iron, and while one leaf of the gate stood wide open, the other was shut. The King's spirits rose high as he stood before the gate and rapped a light rap, but hearing no answer he knocked a second knock and a third, yet there came no sign. Then he knocked his loudest, but still no answer, so he said, "Doubtless 'tis empty." Thereupon he mustered up resolution and boldly walked through the main gate into the great hall, and there cried out aloud, "Hola, ye people of the palace! I am a stranger and a wayfarer. Have you aught here of victual?" He repeated his cry a second time and a third, but still there came no reply. So, strengthening his heart and making up his mind, he stalked through the vestibule into the very middle of the palace, and found no man in it. Yet it was furnished with silken stuffs gold starred, and the hangings were let down over the doorways. In the midst was a spacious court, off which set four open saloons, each with its raised dais, saloon facing saloon. A canopy shaded the court, and in the centre was a jetting fount with four figures of lions, made of red gold, spouting from their mouths water clear as pearls and diaphanous gems. Round about the palace birds were let loose, and over it stretched a net of golden wire, hindering them from flying off. In brief, there was everything but human beings. The King marvelled mightily thereat, yet felt he sad at heart, for that he saw no one to give him account of the waste and its tarn, the fishes, the mountains, and the palace itself. Presently, as he sat between the doors in deep thought, behold, there came a voice of lament, as from a heart grief spent, and he heard the voice chanting these verses: "I hid what I endured of him, and yet it came to light, and nightly sleep mine eyelids fled, and changed to sleepless night. O world, O fate, withhold thy hand and cease thy hurt and harm. Look and behold my hapless sprite in colour and affright. Wilt ne'er show ruth to high born youth who lost him on the way of love, and fell from wealth and fame to lowest, basest wight? Jealous of Zephyr's breath was I as on your form he breathed, but whenas Destiny descends she blindeth human sight. What shall the hapless archer do who, when he fronts his foe and bends his bow to shoot the shaft, shall find his string undight? When cark and care so heavy bear on youth of generous soul, how shall he scape his lot and where from fate his place of flight?" Now when the Sultan heard the mournful voice, he sprang to his feet, and following the sound found a curtain let down over a chamber door. He raised it and saw behind it a young man sitting upon a couch, about a cubit above the ground, and he fair to the sight, a well shaped wight, with eloquence dight. His forehead was flower white, his cheek rosy bright, and a mole on his cheek breadth like an ambergris mite, even as the poet doth indite. A youth slim waisted, from whose locks and brow the world in blackness and in light is set. Throughout creation's round no fairer show, no rarer sight thine eye hath ever met. a nut-brown mole sits throned upon a cheek of rosiest red beneath an eye of jet. The king rejoiced and saluted him, but he remained sitting in his caftan of silken stuff pureed with Egyptian gold, and his crown studded with gems of sorts. But his face was sad with the traces of sorrow. He returned the royal salute in most courteous wise, adding, "O my lord, thy dignity demandeth my rising to thee, and my sole excuse is to crave thy pardon." Quoth the king, "Thou art excused, O youth, so look upon me as thy guest, come hither on an especial object. I would thou acquaint me with the secrets of this tarn and its fishes, and of this palace and thy loneliness therein, and the cause of thy groaning and wailing." When the young man heard these words he wept with sore weeping, till his bosom was drenched with tears, and began reciting, "Say him who careless sleeps, what while the shaft of fortune flies, how many doth this shifting world lay low and raise to rise? Although thine eye be sealed in sleep, sleep not th' Almighty's eyes. And who hath found time ever fair, or fate in constant guise?" Then he sighed a long fetched sigh and recited, "Confide thy case to Him, the Lord who made mankind. Quit cark and care and cultivate content of mind. Ask not the past, or how or why it came to pass. All human things by fate and destiny were designed." The king marvelled and asked him, "What maketh thee weep, O young man?" And he answered, "How should I not weep when this is my case?" Thereupon he put out his hand and raised the skirt of his garment, when lo! the lower half of him appeared stone down to his feet, while from his navel to the hair of his head he was man. The king, seeing this his plight, grieved with sore grief, and of his compassion cried, "Alack and well away! In very sooth, O youth, thou heapest sorrow upon my sorrow. I was minded to ask thee the mystery of the fishes only, whereas now I am concerned to learn thy story as well as theirs. But there is no majesty and there is no might save in Allah the Glorious, the Great. Lose no time, O youth, but tell me forthright thy whole tale." Quoth he, "Lend me thine ears, thy sight and thine insight." And quoth the king, "All are at thy service." Thereupon the youth began, "Right wondrous and marvellous is my case and that of these fishes, and were it graven with gravers upon the eye corners, it were a warner to whoso would be warned." "How is that?" asked the king, and the young man began to tell the tale of the ensorcelled prince. "Know then, O my lord, that whilome my sire was king of this city, and his name was Mahmud, entitled Lord of the Black Islands, and owner of what are now these four mountains. He ruled 60 years, after which he went to the mercy of the Lord, and I reigned as Sultan in his stead. I took to wife my cousin, the daughter of my paternal uncle, and she loved me with such abounding love that whenever I was absent she ate not and she drank not until she saw me again. She cohabited with me for 5 years, till a certain day when she went forth to the Hammam bath, and I bade the cook hasten to get ready all requisites for our supper. And I entered this palace and lay down on the bed where I was wont to sleep, and bade 2 damsels to fan my face, one sitting by my head and the other at my feet. But I was troubled and made restless by my wife's absence and could not sleep, for although my eyes were closed my mind and thoughts were wide awake. Presently I heard the slave girl at my head say to her at my feet, "O Mas'udah, how miserable is our master and how wasted in his youth, and oh the pity of his being so betrayed by our mistress, the accursed whore!" The other replied, "Yes, indeed, Allah curse all faithless women and adulterous! But the like of our master, with his fair gifts, deserveth something better than this harlot who lieth abroad every night." Then quoth she who sat by my head, "Is our lord dumb or fit only for bubbling that he questioneth her not?" And quoth the other, "Fie on thee! Doth our lord know her ways, or doth she allow him his choice? Nay more, doth she not drug every night the cup she giveth him to drink before sleep time, and put Bhang into it? So he sleepeth, and wotteth not whither she goeth, nor what she doth. But we know that after giving him the drugged wine, she donneth her richest raiment, and perfumeth herself, and then she fareth out from him to be away till the break of day. Then she cometh to him, and burneth a pastile under his nose, and he awaketh from his death-like sleep. When I heard the slave girl's words, the light became black before my sight, and I thought night would never fall. Presently the daughter of my uncle came from the baths, and they set the table for us, and we ate and sat together for a fair half hour, quaffing our wine as was ever our wont. Then she called for the particular wine I used to drink before sleeping, and reached me the cup, but seeming to drink it according to my wont, I poured the contents into my bosom, and lying down let her hear that I was asleep. Then behold, she cried, "Sleep out the night and never wake again! By Allah, I loathe thee, and I loathe thy whole body, and my soul turneth in disgust from cohabiting with thee, and I see not the moment when Allah shall snatch away thy life." Then she rose and donned her fairest dress, and perfumed her person, and slung my sword over her shoulder, and opening the gates of the palace, went her ill way. I rose and followed her as she left the palace, and she threaded the streets until she came to the city gate, where she spoke words I understood not, and the padlocks dropped of themselves as if broken, and the gate leaves opened. She went forth, and I after her without her noticing aught, till she came at last to the outlying mounds, and a reed fence built about a round roofed hut of mud bricks. As she entered the door I climbed up upon the roof, which commanded a view of the interior, and lo! my fair cousin had gone in to a hideous negro slave, with his upper lip like the cover of a pot, and his lower like an open pot, lips which might sweep up sand from the gravel floor of the cot. He was to boot a leper and a paralytic, lying upon a strew of sugar cane trash, and wrapped in an old blanket and the foulest rags and tatters. She kissed the earth before him, and he raised his head so as to see her, and said, "Woe to thee! What call hadst thou to stay away all this time? Here have been with me sundry of the black brethren, who drank their wine, and each had his young lady, and I was not content to drink because of thine absence." Then she, "O my lord, my heart's love and coolth of my eyes, knowest thou not that I am married to my cousin whose very look I loathe, and hate myself when in his company? And did not I fear for thy sake I would not let a single sun arise before making his city a ruined heap, wherein raven should croak, and howlet hoot, and jackal and wolf harbour and loot. Nay, I had removed its very stones to the back side of Mount Kaf." Rejoined the slave, "Thou liest, damn thee! Now I swear an oath by the valour and honour of blackamoor men, and deem not our manliness to be the poor manliness of white men. From today forth, if thou stay away till this hour, I will not keep company with thee, nor will I glue my body with thy body, and strum and belly bump. Dost play fast and loose with us, thou cracked pot, that we may satisfy thy dirty lusts? Stinkard, bitch, vilest of the vile whites!" When I heard his words, and saw with mine own eyes what passed between these two wretches, the world waxed dark before my face, and my soul knew not in what place it was. But my wife humbly stood up, weeping before and wheedling the slave, and saying, "O my beloved and the very fruit of my heart, there is none left to cheer me but thy dear self, and if thou cast me off, who shall take me in? O my beloved, O light of my eyes!" And she ceased not weeping and abasing herself to him until he deigned be reconciled with her. Then was she right glad and stood up and doffed her clothes, even to her petticoat trousers, and said, "O my master, what hast thou here for thy handmaiden to eat?" Uncover the basin, he grumbled, and thou shalt find at the bottom the broiled bones of some rats we dined on. Pick at them, and then go to that slop pot, where thou shalt find some leavings of beer, which thou mayest drink. So she ate and drank and washed her hands, and went and laid down by the side of the slave, upon the cane trash, and stripping herself stark naked, she crept in with him under his foul coverlet and his rags and tatters. When I saw my wife, my cousin, the daughter of my uncle, do this deed, I clean lost my wits, and climbing down from the roof, I entered and took the sword which she had with her, and drew it, determined to cut down the twain. I first struck at the slave's neck, and thought that the death decree had fallen on him.—And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. When it was the Eighth Night, she continued, It hath reached me, O auspicious King, that the young ensorcelled Prince said to the King, When I smote the slave with intent to strike off his head, I thought that I had slain him, for he groaned a loud hissing groan, but I had cut only the skin and flesh of the gullet and the two arteries. It awoke the daughter of my uncle, so I sheathed the sword and fared forth for the city, and entering the palace, lay upon my bed and slept till morning, when my wife aroused me, and I saw that she had cut off her hair and had donned mourning garments. Quoth she, O son of my uncle, blame me not for what I do. It hath just reached me that my mother is dead, and my father hath been killed in holy war, and of my brothers one hath lost his life by a snake sting, and the other by falling down some precipice, and I can and should do naught save weep and lament. When I heard her words I refrained from all reproach and said only, Do as thou list, I certainly will not thwart thee. She continued sorrowing, weeping and wailing one whole year from the beginning of its circle to the end, and when it was finished she said to me, I wish to build me in thy palace a tomb with a cupola, which I will set apart for my mourning, and will name the House of Lamentations. Quoth I again, Do as thou list. Then she builded for herself a cenotaph wherein to mourn, and set on its centre a dome, under which showed a tomb like a Santon's sepulchre. Thither she carried the slave and lodged him. But he was exceeding weak by reason of his wound, and unable to do her love service. He could only drink wine, and from the day of his hurt he spake not a word, yet he lived on because his appointed hour was not come. Every day, morning and evening, my wife went to him and wept and wailed over him, and gave him wine and strong soups, and left not off doing after this manner a second year, and I bore with her patiently and paid no heed to her. One day, however, I went in to her unawares, and I found her weeping and beating her face and crying, Why art thou absent from my sight, O my heart's delight? Speak to me, O my life! Talk with me, O my love! Then she recited these verses: For your love my patience fails, and albeit you forget, I may not, nor to other love my heart can make reply. Bear my body, bear my soul, wheresoever you may fare, and where you pitch the camp, let my body buried lie. Cry my name above my grave, and an answer shall return, the moaning of my bones responsive to your cry. Then she recited, weeping bitterly the while, The day of my delight is the day when draw you near, and the day of mine affright is the day you turn away. Though I tremble through the night in my bitter dread of death, when I hold you in my arms I am free from all affray. Once more she began reciting, Though a morn I may awake with all happiness in hand, though the world all be mine, and like Kisra kings I reign, to me they had the worth of the winglet of the gnat, when I fail to see thy form, when I look for thee in vain. When she had ended for a time her words and her weeping, I said to her, O my cousin, let this thy mourning suffice, for in pouring forth tears there is little profit. Thwart me not, answered she, in aught I do, or I will lay violent hands on myself. So I held my peace and left her to go her own way, and she ceased not to cry and keen and indulge her affliction for yet another year. At the end of the third year I waxed aweary of this lonesome mourning, and one day I happened to enter the cenotaph when vexed and angry with some matter which had thwarted me, and suddenly I heard her say, "O my lord, I never hear thee vouchsafe a single word to me. Why dost thou not answer me, O my master?" And she began reciting, O thou tomb, be his beauty set in shade? Hast thou darkened that countenance all sheeny as the noon? O thou tomb, neither earth nor yet heaven art to me. Then how cometh it in thee are conjoined my sun and moon? When I heard such verses as these, rage was heaped upon rage, and I cried out, "Well away! How long is this sorrow to last?" And I began repeating, O thou tomb, be his horrors set in blight? Hast thou darkened his countenance that sickeneth the soul? O thou tomb, neither cesspool nor pipkin art to me. Then how cometh it in thee are conjoined soil and coal? When she heard my words she sprang to her feet, crying, Fie upon thee, thou cur! All this is of thy doings. Thou hast wounded my heart's darling, and thereby worked me sore woe, and thou hast wasted his youth, so that these 3 years he hath lain abed more dead than alive. In my wrath I cried, O thou foulest of harlots and filthiest of whores ever futtered by negro slaves who are hired to have at thee! Yes, indeed, it was I who did this good deed. And snatching up my sword I drew it and made at her to cut her down. But she laughed at my words and mine intent to scorn, crying, To heel, hound that thou art! Alas for the past, which shall no more come to pass, nor shall any one avail the dead to raise. Allah hath indeed now given into my hand him who did to me this thing, a deed that hath burned my heart with a fire which died not, and a flame which might not be quenched. Then she stood up, and pronouncing some words to me unintelligible, she said, By virtue of my necromancy, become thou half stone and half man. Whereupon I became what thou seest, unable to rise or to sit, and neither dead nor alive. Moreover, she ensorcelled the city with all its streets and garths, and she turned by her gramarye the 4 islands into 4 mountains around the tarn whereof thou questionest me, and the citizens, who were of 4 different faiths, Moslem, Nazarene, Jew, and Magian, she transformed by her enchantments into fishes. The Moslems are the white, the Magians red, the Christians blue, and the Jews yellow. And every day she tortureth me and scourgeth me with 100 stripes, each of which draweth floods of blood, and cutteth the skin of my shoulders to strips. And lastly she clotheth my upper half with a hair cloth, and then throweth over them these robes. Hereupon the young man again shed tears, and began reciting, In patience, O my God, I endure my lot and fate. I will bear at will of thee whatsoever be my state. They oppress me, they torture me, they make my life a woe, yet haply heaven's happiness shall compensate my strait. Yea, straitened is my life by the bane and hate of foes, but Mustafa and Murtaza shall ope me heaven's gate. End of section 5 of the Book of 1000 Nights and a Night, Volume 1. The Book of 1000 Nights and a Night, Volume 1, Section 6. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For further information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Volume 1 of the Book of 1000 Nights and a Night, translated by Richard Burton. Section 6. After this the Sultan turned towards the young Prince and said, O youth, thou hast removed one grief only to add another grief. But now, O my friend, where is she? And where is the mausoleum wherein lieth the wounded slave? The slave lieth under yon dome, quoth the young man, and she sitteth in the chamber fronting yonder door. And every day at sunrise she cometh forth, and first strippeth me, and whippeth me with 100 strokes of the leathern scourge, and I weep and shriek, but there is no power of motion in my lower limbs to keep her off. After ending her tormenting me, she visiteth the slave, bringing him wine and boiled meats. And tomorrow at an early hour she will be here. Quoth the King, by Allah, O youth, I will assuredly do thee a good deed which the world shall not willingly let die, and an act of daring do which shall be chronicled long after I am dead and gone by. Then the King sat him by the side of the young Prince and talked till nightfall, when he lay down and slept. But as soon as the false dawn showed, he arose and, doffing his outer garments, bared his blade and hastened to the place wherein lay the slave. Then he was ware of lighted candles and lamps, and the perfume of incenses and unguents, and directed by these he made for the slave and struck him one stroke, killing him on the spot, after which he lifted him on his back and threw him into a well that was in the palace. Presently he returned and, donning the slave's gear, lay down at length within the mausoleum, with the drawn sword laid close to and along his side. After an hour or so the accursed witch came, and first going to her husband, she stripped off his clothes, and taking a whip flogged him cruelly, while he cried out, "Ah, enough for me the case I am in! Take pity on me, O my cousin!" But she replied, "Didst thou take pity on me and spare the life of my true love on whom I doted?" Then she drew the cilice over his raw and bleeding skin, and threw the robe upon all, and went down to the slave with a goblet of wine and a bowl of meat broth in her hands. She entered under the dome, weeping and wailing, "Well away!" and crying, "O my lord, speak a word to me! O my master, talk a while with me!" and began to recite these couplets: How long this harshness, this unlove shall bide? Suffice thee not tear floods thou hast espied? Thou dost prolong our parting purposely, and if wouldst please my foe, thou'rt satisfied. Then she wept again and said, "O my lord, speak to me, talk with me." The King lowered his voice and, twisting his tongue, spoke after the fashion of the blackamoors, and said, "Lack! Lack! There be no majesty and there be no might save in Allah, the Glorious, the Great." Now when she heard these words she shouted for joy and fell to the ground fainting, and when her senses returned she asked, "O my lord, can it be true that thou hast power of speech?" And the King, making his voice small and faint, answered, "O my cuss, dost thou deserve that I talk to thee and speak with thee?" "Why and wherefore?" rejoined she, and he replied, "The why is that all the livelong day thou tormentest thy hubby, and he keeps calling on Heaven for aid, until sleep is strange to me even from evening till morning. And he prays and damns, cussing us two, me and thee, causing me disquiet and much bother. Were this not so, I should long ago have got my health, and it is this which prevents my answering thee." Quoth she, "With thy leave I will release him from what spell is on him." And quoth the King, "Release him and let's have some rest." She cried, "To hear is to obey." And going from the cenotaph to the palace, she took a metal bowl and filled it with water, and spake over it certain words, which made the contents bubble and boil as a cauldron seetheth over the fire. With this she sprinkled her husband, saying, "By virtue of the dread words I have spoken, if thou becamest thus by my spells, come forth out of that form into thine own former form." And lo and behold! the young man shook and trembled, then rose to his feet, and rejoicing at his deliverance cried aloud, "I testify that there is no god but the God, and in very truth Mohammed is his apostle, whom Allah bless and keep." Then she said to him, "Go forth and return not hither, for if thou do I will surely slay thee," screaming these words in his face. So he went from between her hands and she returned to the dome, and going down to the sepulchre she said, O my lord, come forth to me that I may look upon thee and thy goodliness. The king replied in faint, low words, What thing hast thou done? Thou hast rid me of the branch, but not of the root. She asked, O my darling, O my negro king, what is the root? And he answered, Fie on thee, O my cuss! The people of this city and of the four islands, every night when it's half past, lift their heads from the tank in which thou hast turned them to fishes, and cry to heaven, and call down its anger on me and thee, and this is the reason why my body's balked from health. Go at once and set them free, then come to me and take my hand and raise me up, for a little strength is already back in me. When she heard the king's words, and she still supposed him to be the slave, she cried joyously, O my master, on my head and on my eyes be thy command. Bismillah. So she sprang to her feet, and full of joy and gladness ran down to the tarn and took a little of its water in the palm of her hand. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day and ceased to say her permitted say. When it was the 9th night, she said, It hath reached me, O auspicious King, that when the young woman, the sorceress, took in hand some of the tarn water and spake over it words not to be understood, the fishes lifted their heads and stood up on the instant like men, the spell on the people of the city having been removed. What was the lake again became a crowded capital. The bazaars were thronged with folk who bought and sold. Each citizen was occupied with his own calling, and the four hills became islands as they were whilome. Then the young woman, that wicked sorceress, returned to the king, and still thinking he was the negro, said to him, O my love, stretch forth thy honoured hand that I may assist thee to rise. Nearer to me, quoth the king in a faint and feigned tone. She came close as to embrace him, when he took up the sword lying hid by his side and smote her across the breast, so that the point showed gleaming behind her back. Then he smote her a second time and cut her in twain and cast her to the ground in two halves. After which he fared forth and found the young man, now freed from the spell, awaiting him and gave him joy of his happy release, while the king kissed his hand with abundant thanks. Quoth the king, Wilt thou abide in this city or go with me to my capital? Quoth the youth, O King of the age, wottest thou not what journey is between thee and thy city? 2 days and a half, answered he. Whereupon said the other, An thou be sleeping, O King, awake! Between thee and thy city is a year's march for a well-girt walker, and thou haddest not come hither in 2 days and a half, save that the city was under enchantment. And I, O King, will never part from thee, no, not even for the twinkling of an eye. The king rejoiced at his words and said, Thanks be to Allah who hath bestowed thee upon me. From this hour thou art my son and my only son, for that in all my life I have never been blessed with issue. Thereupon they embraced and joyed with exceeding great joy, and reaching the palace, the prince who had been spellbound informed his lords and his grandees that he was about to visit the holy places as a pilgrim, and bade them get ready all things necessary for the occasion. The preparations lasted 10 days, after which he set out with the Sultan, whose heart burned in yearning for his city whence he had been absent a whole 12-month. They journeyed with an escort of Mamelukes, carrying all manner of precious gifts and rarities. Nor stinted they wayfaring day and night for a full year, until they approached the Sultan's capital, and sent on messengers to announce their coming. Then the Wazir and the whole army came out to meet him in joy and gladness, for they had given up all hope of ever seeing their king, and the troops kissed the ground before him and wished him joy of his safety. He entered and took seat upon his throne, and the minister came before him, and when acquainted with all that had befallen the young prince, he congratulated him on his narrow escape. When order was restored throughout the land, the king gave largesse to many of his people, and said to the Wazir, Hither the fisherman who brought us the fishes. So he sent for the man who had been the first cause of the city and the citizens being delivered from enchantment, and when he came into the presence, the Sultan bestowed upon him a dress of honour and questioned him of his condition and whether he had children. The Fisherman gave him to know that he had two daughters and a son. So the King sent for them and, taking one daughter to wife, gave the other to the young Prince and made the son his head treasurer. Furthermore he invested his Wazir with the Sultanate of the city in the Black Islands, whilome belonging to the young Prince, and dispatched him the escort of 50 armed slaves together with dresses of honour for all the Emirs and Grandees. The Wazir kissed hands and fared forth on his way, while the Sultan and the Prince abode at home in all the solace and the delight of life, and the Fisherman became the richest man of his age, and his daughters wived with kings, until death came to them. And yet, O King, this is not more wondrous than the story of the Porter and the three ladies of Baghdad. Once upon a time there was a porter in Baghdad who was a bachelor and who would remain unmarried. It came to pass on a certain day, as he stood about the street leaning idly upon his crate, behold, there stood before him an honourable woman in a mantilla of Mosul silk, broidered with gold and bordered with brocade. Her walking shoes were also purfled with gold, and her hair floated in long plaits. She raised her face veil and, showing two black eyes fringed with jetty lashes, whose glances were soft and languishing, and whose perfect beauty was ever blandishing, she accosted the porter and said in the suavest tones and choicest language, "Take up thy crate and follow me." The porter was so dazzled he could hardly believe that he heard her aright, but he shouldered his basket in hot haste, saying in himself, "O day of good luck! O day of Allah's grace!" and walked after her till she stopped at the door of a house. There she rapped, and presently came out to her an old man, a Nazarene, to whom she gave a gold piece, receiving from him in return what she required of strained wine clear as olive oil, and she set it safely in the hamper, saying, "Lift and follow." Quoth the porter, "This, by Allah, is indeed an auspicious day, a day propitious for the granting of all a man wisheth." He again hoisted up the crate and followed her, till she stopped at a fruiterer's shop and bought from him Shami apples and Osmani quinces and Omani peaches and cucumbers of Nile growth and Egyptian limes and Sultani oranges and citrons, besides Aleppine jasmine, scented myrtle berries, Damascene nenuphars, flower of privet and chamomile, blood red anemones, violets and pomegranate bloom, eglantine and narcissus, and set the whole in the porter's crate, saying, "Up with it!" So he lifted and followed her till she stopped at a butcher's booth and said, "Cut me off 10 pounds of mutton." She paid him his price and he wrapped it in a banana leaf, whereupon she laid it in the crate and said, "Hoist, O porter!" He hoisted accordingly and followed her as she walked on till she stopped at a grocer's, where she bought dry fruits and pistachio kernels, Tihama raisins, shelled almonds and all wanted for dessert, and said to the porter, "Lift and follow me." So he up with his hamper and after her till she stayed at the confectioner's, and she bought an earthen platter and piled it with all kinds of sweetmeats in his shop, openwork tarts and fritters scented with musk, and soap cakes and lemon loaves and melon preserves and Zainab's combs and ladies' fingers and Kazi's titbits and goodies of every description, and placed the platter in the porter's crate. Thereupon quoth he, being a merry man, "Thou shouldest have told me and I would have brought with me a pony or a she camel to carry all this market stuff." She smiled and gave him a little cuff on the nape, saying, "Step out and exceed not in words, for, Allah willing, thy wage will not be wanting." Then she stopped at a perfumer's and took from him 10 sorts of waters, rose scented with musk, orange flower, water lily, willow flower, violet and 5 others, and she also bought 2 loaves of sugar, a bottle for perfume spraying, a lump of male incense, aloe wood, ambergris and musk, with candles of Alexandria wax, and she put the whole into the basket, saying, "Up with thy crate and after me." He did so and followed until she stood before the greengrocers, of whom she bought pickled safflower and olives in brine and in oil, with tarragon and cream cheese and hard Syrian cheese; and she stowed them away in the crate, saying to the porter, "Take up thy basket and follow me." He did so and went after her till she came to a fair mansion fronted by a spacious court, a tall fine place, to which columns gave strength and grace, and the gate thereof had two leaves of ebony inlaid with plates of red gold. The lady stopped at the door and, turning her face veil sideways, knocked softly with her knuckles, whilst the porter stood behind her, thinking of naught save her beauty and loveliness. Presently the door swung back and both leaves were opened, whereupon he looked to see who had opened it, and behold, it was a lady of tall figure, some 5 feet high, a model of beauty and loveliness, brilliance and symmetry and perfect grace. Her forehead was flower white, her cheeks like the anemone, ruddy bright. Her eyes were those of the wild heifer or the gazelle, with eyebrows like the crescent moon which ends Sha'ban and begins Ramadan. Her mouth was the ring of Sulayman, her lips coral red, and her teeth like a line of strung pearls or of chamomile petals. Her throat recalled the antelope's, and her breasts, like two pomegranates of even size, stood at bay as it were. Her body rose and fell in waves below her dress like the rolls of a piece of brocade, and her navel would hold an ounce of benzoin ointment. In fine, she was like her of whom the poet said, "On sun and moon of Palace cast thy sight, enjoy her flower like face, her fragrant light. Thine eyes shall never see in hair so black beauty encase a brow so purely white. The ruddy rose cheek proclaims her claim, though fail her name whose beauties we indite. As sways her gait I smile at hips so big, and weep to see the waist they bear so slight." When the porter looked upon her his wits were waylaid and his senses were stormed, so that his crate went nigh to fall from his head, and he said to himself, "Never have I in my life seen a day more blessed than this day." Then quoth the lady portress to the lady cateress, "Come in from the gate and relieve this poor man of his load." So the provisioner went in, followed by the portress and the porter, and went on till they reached a spacious ground floor hall, built with admirable skill and beautified with all manner colours and carvings, with upper balconies and groined arches and galleries and cupboards and recesses whose curtains hung before them. In the midst stood a great basin full of water surrounding a fine fountain, and at the upper end on the raised dais was a couch of juniper wood, set with gems and pearls, with a canopy like mosquito curtains of red satin silk looped up with pearls as big as filberts and bigger. Thereupon sat a lady bright of blee, with brow beaming brilliancy, the dream of philosophy, whose eyes were fraught with Babel's gramarye, and her eyebrows were arched as for archery. Her breath breathed ambergris and perfumery, and her lips were sugar to taste and carnelian to see. Her stature was straight as the letter E, and her face shamed the noon sun's radiancy, and she was even as a galaxy or a dome with golden marquetry, or a bride displayed in choicest finery, or a noble maid of Araby. Right well of her sang the bard when he said, "Her smiles twin rows of pearls display, Chamomile buds or rimy spray, Her tresses stray as night let down, And shames her light the dawn o' day." The third lady, rising from the couch, stepped forward with graceful swaying gait till she reached the middle of the saloon, when she said to her sisters, "Why stand ye here? Take it down from this poor man's head." Then the cateress went and stood before him, and the portress behind him, while the third helped them, and they lifted the load from the porter's head and, emptying it of all that was therein, set everything in its place. Lastly they gave him 2 gold pieces, saying, "Wend thy ways, O porter." But he went not, for he stood looking at the ladies and admiring what uncommon beauty was theirs, and their pleasant manners and kindly dispositions; never had he seen goodlier. and he gazed wistfully at that good store of wines and sweet-scented flowers and fruits and other matters. Also he marvelled with exceeding marvel, especially to see no man in the place, and delayed his going. Whereupon quoth the eldest lady, What aileth thee that goest not? Haply thy wage be too little? And turning to her sister the cateress, she said, Give him another dinar. But the porter answered, By Allah, my lady, it is not for the wage. My hire is never more than 2 dirhams. But in very sooth my heart and my soul are taken up with you and your condition. I wonder to see you single, with ne'er a man about you, and not a soul to bear you company. And well you wot that the minaret toppleth over unless it stand upon four, and you want this same fourth. And women's pleasure without man is short of measure, even as the poet said, Cease not, we want for joy 4 things all told, the harp and lute, the flute and flageolet, and be they companied with scents fourfold, rose, myrtle, anemone, and violet. Nor please all 8, and 4 thou wouldst withhold, good wine and youth, and gold, and pretty pet. You be there and want a 4th, who shall be a person of good sense and prudence, smart witted, and one apt to keep careful counsel. His words pleased and amused them much, and they laughed at him and said, And who is to assure us of that? We are maidens, and we fear to entrust our secret where it may not be kept. For we have read in a certain chronicle the lines of one Ibn Sumam, Hold fast thy secret and to none unfold. Lost is a secret when that secret's told. And fail thy breast thy secret to conceal, how canst thou hope another's breast shall hold? And Abu Nawas said well on the same subject, Who trusteth secret to another's hand, upon his brow deserveth burn of brand. When the porter heard their words he rejoined, By your lives, I am a man of sense and a discreet, who hath read books and perused chronicles. I reveal the fair and conceal the foul, and I act as the poet adviseth. None but the good a secret keep, and good men keep it unrevealed. It is to me a well shut house, with keyless locks and door ensealed. When the maidens heard his verse and its poetical application addressed to them, they said, Thou knowest that we have laid out all our monies on this place. Now say, hast thou aught to offer us in return for entertainment? For surely we will not suffer thee to sit in our company, and be our cup companion, and gaze upon our faces so fair and so rare, without paying a round sum. Wottest thou not the saying, Sans hope of gain, love's not worth a grain? Whereto the lady portress added, If thou bring anything, thou art a something. If nothing, be off with thee, thou art a nothing. But the procuratrix interposed, saying, Nay, O my sisters, leave teasing him, for by Allah he hath not failed us this day, and had he been other, he never had kept patience with me. So whatever be his shot and scot, I will take it upon myself. The porter, overjoyed, kissed the ground before her and thanked her, saying, By Allah, these monies are the first fruits this day hath given me. Hearing this, they said, Sit thee down and welcome to thee. And the eldest lady added, By Allah, we may not suffer thee to join us save on one condition, and this it is, that no questions be asked as to what concerneth thee not, and frowardness shall be soundly flogged. Answered the porter, I agree to this, my lady, on my head and my eyes be it. Look ye, I am dumb, I have no tongue. Then arose the provisioneress and, tightening her girdle, set the table by the fountain, and put the flowers and sweet herbs in their jars, and strained the wine, and ranged the flasks in row, and made ready every requisite. Then sat she down, she and her sisters, placing amidst them the porter, who kept deeming himself in a dream, and she took up the wine flagon, and poured out the first cup and drank it off, and likewise a second, and a third. After this she filled a fourth cup, which she handed to one of her sisters, and lastly she crowned a goblet and passed it to the porter, saying, Drink the dear draught, drink free and fain, what healeth every grief and pain. He took the cup in his hand, and louting low, returned his best thanks, and improvised, Drain not the bowl save with a trusty friend, a man of worth who's good and old. For wine, like wind, sucks sweetness from the sweet, and stinks when over stench it haply blow. Adding, drain not the bowl save from dear hand like thine. The cup recall thy gifts, thou gifts of wine. After repeating this couplet he kissed their hands and drank and was drunk, and sat swaying from side to side, and pursued, all drinks wherein is blood the law unclean doth hold, save one, the blood shed of the vine. Fill, fill, take all my wealth bequeathed or won, thou fawn, a willing ransom for those eyne. Then the cateress crowned a cup and gave it to the portress, who took it from her hand and thanked her and drank. Thereupon she poured again and passed to the eldest lady who sat on the couch, and filled yet another and handed it to the porter. He kissed the ground before them, and after drinking and thanking them he again began to recite, here, here, by Allah, here! Cups of the sweet, the dear, fill me a brimming bowl, the fount of life I spear. Then the porter stood up before the mistress of the house and said, O lady, I am thy slave, thy Mameluke, thy white thrall, thy very bondsman. And he began reciting, a slave of slaves there standeth at thy door, lauding thy generous boons and gifts galore. Beauty, may he come in a while to joy thy charms, for love and I part nevermore. She said to him, drink, and health and happiness attend thy drink. So he took the cup and kissed her hand and recited these lines in sing-song. I gave her brave old wine that like her cheeks blushed red or flame from furnace flaring up. She bussed the brim and said with many a smile, how durst thou deal folk's cheek for folk to sup? Drink, said I, these are tears of mine whose tinct is heart blood sighs have boiled in the cup. She answered him in the following couplet, and tears of blood for me, friend, thou hast shed, suffer me sup them by thy head and eyes. Then the lady took the cup and drank it off to her sister's health, and they ceased not drinking, the porter being in the midst of them, and dancing and laughing and reciting verses and singing ballads and ritornellos. All this time the porter was carrying on with them, kissing, toying, biting, handling, groping, fingering, whilst one thrust a dainty morsel in his mouth and another slapped him, and this cuffed his cheeks and that threw sweet flowers at him, and he was in the very paradise of pleasure, as though he were sitting in the seventh sphere among the Houris of heaven. They ceased not doing after this fashion until the wine played tucks in their heads and worsted their wits, and when the drink got the better of them, the portress stood up and doffed her clothes till she was mother naked. However, she let down her hair about her body by way of a shift, and throwing herself into the basin, disported herself and dived like a duck, and swam up and down, and took water in her mouth, and spurted it all over the porter, and washed her limbs, and between her breasts, and inside her thighs, and all around her navel. Then she came up out of the cistern, and throwing herself on the porter's lap, said, O my lord, O my love, what callest thou this article? Pointing to her slit, her solution of continuity. I call that thy cleft, quoth the porter, and she rejoined, Wah, wah, art thou not ashamed to use such a word? And she caught him by the collar and soundly cuffed him. Said he again, Thy womb, thy vulva, and she struck him a second slap, crying, Oh, fie, fie, this is another ugly word. Is here no shame in thee? Quoth he, Thy coint, and she cried, Oh, thou art wholly destitute of modesty, and thumped and bashed him. Then cried the porter, Thy clitoris, whereat the eldest lady came down upon him with a yet sorer beating, and said, No, and he said, 'Tis so. And the porter went on calling the same commodity by sundry other names, but whatever he said they beat him more and more, till his neck ached and swelled with the blows he had gotten, and on this wise they made him a butt and a laughing stock. At last he turned upon them, asking, And what do you women call this article? Whereto the damsel made answer, The basil of the bridges. cried the Porter. "Thank Allah for my safety. Aid me and be thou propitious, O Basil of the Bridges." They passed round the cup and tossed off the bowl again, when the second lady stood up and, stripping off all her clothes, cast herself into the cistern and did as the first had done. Then she came out of the water and, throwing her naked form on the Porter's lap, pointed to her machine and said, "O light of mine eyes, do tell me what is the name of this concern." He replied as before, "Thy slit." And she rejoined, "Hath such term no shame for thee?" and cuffed him and buffeted him till the saloon rang with the blows. Then quoth she, "O fie, fie! How canst thou say this without blushing?" He suggested, "The Basil of the Bridges," but she would not have it and said, "No, no," and struck him and slapped him on the back of the neck. Then he began calling out all the names he knew, "Thy slit, thy womb, thy coint, thy clitoris," and the girls kept on saying, "No, no." So he said, "I stick to the Basil of the Bridges," and all the three laughed till they fell on their backs and laid slaps on his neck and said, "No, no, that's not its proper name." Thereupon he cried, "O my sisters, what is its name?" And they replied, "What sayest thou to the husked sesame seed?" Then the cateress donned her clothes and they fell again to carousing, but the Porter kept moaning "Oh!" and "Oh!" for his neck and shoulders, and the cup passed merrily round and round again for a full hour. After that time the eldest and handsomest lady stood up and stripped off her garments, whereupon the Porter took his neck in hand and rubbed and shampooed it, saying, "My neck and shoulders are on the way of Allah." Then she threw herself into the basin and swam and dived, sported and washed, and the Porter looked at her naked figure as though she had been a slice of the moon, and at her face with the sheen of Luna when at full, or like the dawn when it brighteneth, and he noted her noble stature and shape, and those glorious forms that quivered as she went, for she was naked as the Lord made her. Then he cried, "Alack! Alack!" and began to address her, versifying in these couplets: "If I liken thy shape to the bough when green, my likeness errs and I sore mistake it; for the bough is fairest when clad the most, and thou art fairest when mother naked." When the lady heard his verses she came up out of the basin and, seating herself upon his lap and knees, pointed to her genitory and said, "O my lordling, what be the name of this?" Quoth he, "The Basil of the Bridges." But she said, "Bah! bah!" Quoth he, "The husked sesame." Quoth she, "Poor! poor!" Then said he, "Thy womb," and she cried, "Fie! fie! Art thou not ashamed of thyself?" and cuffed him on the nape of the neck. And whatever name he gave, declaring "'Tis so," she beat him and cried, "No, no!" till at last he said, "O my sisters, and what is its name?" She replied, "It is entitled the Khan of Abu Mansur." Whereupon the Porter replied, "Ha ha! O Allah be praised for safe deliverance, O Khan of Abu Mansur." Then she came forth and dressed, and the cup went round a full hour. At last the Porter rose up and, stripping off all his clothes, jumped into the tank and swam about and washed under his bearded chin and armpits, even as they had done. Then he came out and threw himself into the first lady's lap, and rested his arms upon the lap of the portress, and reposed his legs in the lap of the cateress, and pointed to his prickle and said, "O my mistresses, what is the name of this article?" All laughed at his words till they fell on their backs, and one said, "Thy pintle." But he replied, "No," and gave each one of them a bite by way of forfeit. Then said they, "Thy pizzle." But he cried, "No," and gave each of them a hug. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day and ceased saying her permitted say.